Welcome to the Future of Education. I'm really intrigued and excited about this conversation with pioneers in the field of learning and education more generally. We've got Zoey Haar, a graduate of the class of 2019 from the Minerva Institute, Minerva Schools, the first graduating class from Minerva, which is one of the boldest experiments and innovations right now, I would say, in higher education in the world. Extremely fascinating set of learning operations that they've stood up. And then Renee Mindek, who's with Laurel Springs Online, and Renee is the Dean of Innovation there, and brought the Minerva experience into a high school for the first time, an online high school, and really intrigued to talk about that experience. You're both pioneers in this work. You're both the first to go through this experience with Minerva. So first, welcome to you both.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited for this conversation because I suspect I'm going to learn a lot in it as well. So Zoey, I'll start with you, which is, for those who don't know, maybe let's start with a high-level overview of what is Minerva Institute, what is the Minerva College experience like, and as people sort of put a visual in their mind, what should they be thinking about? And I'll flash the website up there so people can also check it out while you're talking.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say, Michael, if I had a nickel for every time I tried to answer that question, I think first and foremost, the Minerva experience, like any college experience, is different for everyone because it's college. That is fundamentally what it is. It's a time when you graduate high school and you step out into the world and you're a young adult for the first time. The difference with Minerva is that the world you're stepping out into is not a campus and it moves all over. So you're stepping out not just into a city with the same group of people and the same class, but instead into a different city every semester. So at Minerva, you start your first year generally in San Francisco. This is a non-COVID time, but typically you start in a city, and then every semester after your first year, you move around with a cohort of students. So like any college experience, you have your class of people and you're learning and growing with them and taking different classes and meeting people both socially and academically in different contexts, but you're also moving with them and immersing into different cultures. As an academic experience, I think that's where it departs more from a traditional university in some senses. Certainly the campus is very different, but that's ultimately really about where you rest your head at night and where you go to the gym, and whether that's on a university campus. But academically, Minerva is very different in that everything is seminar based, and instead of being driven by tests or scores, generally, you're working on a foundation of principles. So we call those the habits of mind and foundational concepts. And those continue on through your 4 years and your bachelor's degree at Minerva. And even I believe they use a similar set in the master's degree. And so that's a very different paradigm way of thinking about your education. You're not graduating from 101 to 102, although certainly our courses are numbered. But instead, you're working with named principles instead of just these kind of ephemeral concepts that you maybe recognize. And so I think the thing that strikes me as most different from my past experiences in any form of education and what I understand my peers to have had is that it's a much more explicit way of thinking about your learning. Every student is challenged not just to take the classes and pass and excel, but to say, here is how and what I'm learning and how I'm progressing. So it's really just bringing those principles and the foundational concepts to the forefront instead of letting them just kind of slide underneath the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. That's extremely helpful. And I should disclose for those watching online right now that I am on the board of the Minerva Schools. So I should have added that up front, but there it is. Renee, turning to you, what is this experience going to look like in the high school environment online? And just to give people a feel for what you're shaping right now, because Laurel Springs obviously is an online school, has been a leader in that movement for a long time. Mm-hmm. I've seen you all out in the field when we used to travel for in many venues and so forth. But this is a very different experience you're now building and shaping. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that.
Great. So it's nice to be able to follow up to a little bit of what Zoe said about some of the experiences. When Laurel Springs decided that we wanted to undertake this adventure with the Minerva Project, it was really an answer to questions and a need for students to have some of what she was talking about, that real world application of skills. And like you said, Michael, we've been an online private school for almost 30 years. We'll be celebrating our 30th anniversary in next year. And there is this need now to sort of deconstruct some of the silos that have started to take root in traditional education, where it's very discipline heavy, specific to a discipline, and work to get the students in even these high school years to start to see these interconnected real world ways that learning and application exists. So the beauty of what we're undertaking, I guess, the challenge of what we're undertaking right now is to bring that in Minerva's active learning forum to our school. And yeah, that's what we're taking on right now with the Minerva Baccalaureate.
And so just to make it explicit for those who aren't familiar, it's going to be a baccalaureate program that students take for a portion of their high school curriculum, and they're actually going to be able to get credit, right? That stands for it, similar to what you might get for an advanced placement or IB or some program like that, or how are you envisioning that?
So I would say that there are certainly some similarities between the AP and the IB programs, which are pedagogies that a lot of your listeners in the United States would probably recognize. But what makes the Minerva Baccalaureate different is that these students are going to be taking on a 4-year program, the 3 years of which are going to be in the high school or the upper school setting of our private school. But then that 4th year is a full college year. So they will be taking their 4th year of high school, completing the requirements that they need for their high school diploma at the same time that they are getting college courses for 32 credits that they'll be getting when they're taking that 4th year of high school simultaneously with their 1st year of college. So it is very different in that regard.
Yeah, so it's a full year of college, right?
That's right.
That it counts for at most places anyway with the credit system. So backing up now, I'd love to talk sort of how you all got into this experience originally. You're both pioneers in this in your own way. Zoe, take me back. You're a high school junior, senior. I don't know when you first heard of Minerva. What was the first time you heard of it and sort of your first thought that, gee, that's something I ought to look into?
Yeah, well, Minerva, I don't even know if Minerva publicly existed in my junior year. But so in the time machine, we're in, well, I guess January of 2014. I'm a high school senior. I think I'm in the clear. It's been about a week, maybe 2 weeks since I signed, sealed, delivered all of my many college admissions essays and papers and test scores and all that. And I dragged myself through the whole painful process and I hated every minute of it. And I was kind of ready. I was thinking, this is what I'll be doing. I'll go to a traditional liberal arts school. I was doing what every high achieving high school student does and try and get into the best one. I'm going to get these scores and put these things on my application. And then Minerva pops up, and I think it was a Yahoo News article, to be honest, where high school seniors.
That's amazing.
Yeah, Yahoo News. But it came up and it was just perfectly targeted to my interests. It was something along the lines of, watch out, Harvard, there's a new Ivy on the rise. And of course, I, being a very competitive 17-year-old, immediately hit right on that. And I started reading it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the school that I've been explaining to my guidance counselors shortly before they laughed me out of the room. When I would, I'd come in and I'd say to them, for me, it would be great if I could study abroad every year, or if I had this amount of control over my education. And, they would always say to me, okay, you can maybe get one of those things at this school, but you can't just pick and choose those characteristics. Schools that tend to deviate from the norm tend to deviate in one way. So I read about Minerva and I say to myself, well, this is all I care about now forever. and just kind of throw myself into reading more about it and learning more. And I immediately started an application. And at the time, it hadn't really been written up. There were no students. They were saying, we're just going to take a test class, and, you'll do a year, then you'll take a year off, and we'll work on the feedback you gave us on how that experience went. You'll kind of be a partner in building it. And then you come back and we'll just go through the next couple of years. And it all just kind of spiraled from there. I did my application, I got in, and then next thing I knew, I was in San Francisco.
So I want to drill a little bit deeper on that, because it's fascinating. You said essentially every other school that you were applying to was forcing you to make trade-offs that you had been explicit about that you sort of didn't want to make. And then Minerva offered like the right set of mix of all these different programs. But through the application process and getting to know it, I'm sure you still had doubts. Like, they hadn't had class yet. How did you what anxieties or questions were in your mind of like, is this real? I imagine was a big question.
There was definitely, upon reading that first article, there was a huge moment of, is this real? I would be lying if I said that I was particularly diligent about or skeptical. I think I definitely, as a young 17-year-old wanting to believe this was real, did not apply maybe the best critical thinking skills, but I really did. I did start to look into it deeper, and there was a history, and Minerva, had been appearing more and more frequently in small write-ups or interviews along the way. And so certainly I was nervous about starting something that didn't exist, but at the same time, the way I saw it was, okay, so what they've said that this program will look like is I come in with a small group of interesting high schoolers or new college students from around the world who are also interested in this crazy experience. And we spend a year together trying to build something alongside all of these incredible academics who have also expressed an interest in making something new. And then I take a year off, and I'd always kind of wanted to take a gap year. So that was kind of built in perfectly. That's not part of Minerva's program, but it was an off-ramp for me as one of the new students. And then you get to finish the next 3 years out. So as I walked myself through it, I thought, okay, well, my worst case scenario is, let's say 2.5 years in, I decide, this really isn't for me. I wish I'd gone with one of the more traditional options. At that point, I have this incredible education of getting to move to San Francisco and live in this environment I never saw myself in, meet all these incredible people from around the world, participate in a really new way of thinking about learning. And then I'm just back where I am now, which is I have to choose a school. So it didn't really seem like a big loss for me. It was a great experience. And if I didn't want to finish it, you don't have to, you transfer. But
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. It's just I want to drill in both of this with both of you, just because I think it's interesting, right? For folks that are going to watch this, and maybe parents or students who haven't heard about Minerva before, and they start thinking about what could this be, sort of hearing it through the eyes of people who were the first, I think is instructive. We'll come back to you in a moment. I want to see what your parents said during that experience. But Renee, I'll shift to you. What I'd love to have you reflect on is the same question in essence, which is, what was the first time you heard of Minerva, period, I guess? And then what was the first time in the context of shaping this very unique high school experience that's really unprecedented in the way you've done it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first time that I heard about Minerva, it may have been something similar to Zoey's example, something like in the news, in the media and things like that. But specific to our institution, our school is really fortunate to have teams of dedicated people that are constantly looking for what this learner needs. And by this learner, it's all the learners that we have. They all come to us with unique interests, skills, and talents. And so, in this day and age where online learning is becoming more and more prevalent, particularly most recently in the current time that we're in, we needed to find a way to continue to provide the best that we could for our students. And one of the things that strikes me the most about what Laurel Springs Academy is doing with Minerva is that these are just much more resilient institutions than what we're going to find in traditional AP or IB programs, or in any traditional program, where we're not so tethered to, and Zoe mentioned this, you're not so tethered to these ideas of standardized tests being the measure of where learning takes place. You know, like Zoe said, as soon as she was moving to San Francisco, learning was already underway. And the program that we're bringing to the Academy at Laurel Springs with Minerva Baccalaureate embodies that principle, that learning is ever present, that it should be provided in a way that's resilient to the changes that are going on around us, and that students have an active role in sort of shaping how their learning takes place. So the interdisciplinary nature, the active learning forum, all of that was just very compelling to us when we were looking at what we wanted to do next. One of my favorite quotes is Victor Hugo. It's a little nod to my French background, but there is nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And in this time, this platform and what we're offering to students, it's time has come. We need to value that student learning can take place in ways that are sort of unpacked from the way we thought that they had to be previously.
So staying on that theme just for a moment of, you know, the idea of whose time had come, if you will.
Yeah.
How did that first conversation between you and the team at Minerva sort of unfold? Was it you all reaching out to them? Was it them reaching out to you? Sort of take us a little bit inside, because I suspect a lot of folks at other high schools are going to wonder, hey, should we be doing something like this as well?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the first time that I was able to, and I'm going to say play with it, it was my colleagues and I, we were invited to play in the active learning forum. And it was unlike anything any of us had ever experienced, even having been in online education for as many years as we have. So I guess my first experience with that was that I was completely and 100% engaged. All of my senses were tuned in to what was going on. We were just really talking about how this might look for our students in our school, but the hour that we had working with each other and with our Minerva faculty counterparts was riveting. So I don't know who exactly got us to get that playtime at the first time that we got in Minerva Forum, but that was really kind of what sealed the deal, knowing that our students were going to want to be the pioneers that Zoe and her classmates were, that we have a pool of students that want to be trying to be that intellectually engaged and curious and honored in their learning. And that sealed the deal for us, that first playtime in our Minerva Forum.
That's perfect. We're going to come back to the forum in just a moment, because I want to talk about how it's different from a lot of the learning experience that people have had over the last several months in COVID and sort of Zoom you, if you will. But Zoe, first to you, and what I hinted I'd ask about your parents' reaction and sort of peers around you, right? What was their reaction as you started to go through this process?
Yeah, so I think there's two very different aspects of Minerva that elicit different kinds of responses. The one is the very different nature of the spaces you inhabit and the people you're with. So Minerva attracts an international body of students, and not just international, but just very different minded. They're people who are looking to really take charge and be a part of their education rather than just being served it. And so anytime that was explained to any of my peers or people who knew me, they all said, oh, well, that's so you. That sounds great. The new part of it definitely elicited a lot more skepticism. I think it took probably 5 years before my grandparents were able to describe what Minerva is and what it means and does. And I think that is very much a part of what Minerva is it's an answer to problems that exist for my generation and my peers today that didn't necessarily exist before. And so to me and people my age, it's a clear answer and it makes sense. But my parents, they were very supportive, and they, like I said, like anyone who knew me saw the elements of it and thought, this is so you. And when you talk to a lot of Minerva students, and Renee, I'm sure you have this with high school students as well, you can see the type of student and the type of person even just from a conversation, you think this person thinks in this way and would be attracted to this type of autonomy in a learning space. The new element of it was something my parents definitely had to get used to, but ultimately they vetted it. They met the peers, they met some of the professors, they saw the platform, and once you're exposed to something and you can see it and you can describe it and touch and taste and smell it, for not literally, but the idea that it's right in front of you, it becomes less scary. It's a real thing, and once it's real, it's hard to make up myths about it.
Zoe, just double clicking on something you said that I think is very interesting, which is you said it's an answer to the problems that college poses for my generation. Can you go one level deeper on how you would lay out those challenges and the opportunities that Minerva represents?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way I see it, there's a little bit of a pause on some of these because of the nature of COVID and the way that our world has changed in the past, 25 weeks. But I think in a general sense, my generation, my peers, were so much more globally minded now than I think people have been in years past. And I don't just mean culturally or in terms of interpersonal exchanges, but the businesses we're going to be entering, the laws that we're going to have to deal with, the problems that we're seeing play out on the news, climate change, all of these things are suddenly so much more connected than they were, just a generation ago. And the desire to be prepared for that is very real. And not just be prepared for that, but when you think about what college does and why we crave that experience, it's because you want to finally be participating in a world that is kind of held at arm's length to a high schooler, because you're still learning, you're still gaining these skills. And then when you go to college, you're allowed to kind of step foot into the world and start learning to become a part of it. And we want to be a part of the world that exists for us. And not every college allows for that. The way that problems are approached, the way that subjects are siloed, or your exchanges with individuals across cultures or ideas. It's some colleges, not all, but some are a little outdated. And so Minerva really answered that desire to train yourself to participate.
Renee, you referenced that as well, the nature of how subjects have become siloed, and we've sort of pulled these apart. And Zoe earlier said how Minerva really names all of the skills that you acquire explicitly in the curriculum, right? It's not sort of, oh, you learn to do this type of critical thinking just by osmosis through the through the nature of the work, but it's very explicitly built and broken down, right? I'd love you to reflect on, you all are just launching the experience, right? So you haven't gone through it yet with your students, but I'd love you to talk about what that experience will look like and how different it is from a way a traditional high school is structured.
Okay, sure. So essentially, the students are still going to be exposed to and have access to the discipline-specific content that all elite colleges and any other kind of post-secondary or post-high school education is going to require. But then when they come together in their live class times, they get a chance to explore those more deeply in interconnected ways. So we're not sacrificing that they're going to be in high-level math classes, science classes, English classes, and things of that nature. But when they enter into conversations in their peer-to-peer relationships in their forum, that's when that real-world application is going to take place. So the learning outcomes that they're going to be working on, they're going to be working on those in all of their classes across all of the 3 years. And it's a little bit like what she mentioned, the habits of mind and foundational concepts. We have something like that too. For example, if students are studying what it means to address a specific audience and what that's going to look like if you're writing an English paper versus, writing a lab report, they still understand conceptually what the importance of audience is and how to tailor their products and what they're delivering around that. I think the beauty of it comes from the fact that they can really dive deep into their disciplines a bit on their own pace. And then when they come to class, they meet twice per week. In our program, they'll meet twice per week for every class. That's when that real high level engagement and interaction occurs with the material, but with their professor and with their peers as well. So it's really just kind of like the best of both worlds in terms of getting that discipline content, but then applying it in a connected way.
Sounds incredible, frankly. So I'd love you both then to talk about the active learning platform itself. You both have mentioned it. Zoom has sort of become America's default on what education looks like in this time of COVID. There are some aspects of the Minerva platform that have elements, I would say, of Zoom, but it's very different. I'd love you both to reflect on what that experience actually is like. And Zoey, maybe start, you had a firsthand seat on it for 4 years. What was that experience like for you? I would say from my perspective, it looks amazing, but it also looks exhausting. So I would love your reflections.
It's all of those things. I can certainly speak to the platform. And one of the things that, this is perhaps a bit of a tangent, but indulge me, that I think is really cool about the platform is that because it's a piece of technology, I'm thinking back to my first year at Minerva and then comparing that to my last semester and just how much the platform grew and how different
it's super interesting.
Yeah, and how the features were, it's like if your classroom in a traditional college like grew an arm and could just do something new, which is, I'm just having this reflection now, a really interesting thing to think about. But I'm hesitant to say anything negative about Zoom because I'm about to hop on a Zoom meeting this afternoon and I'm like afraid of retaliation, but there are a lot of limitations to Zoom. It's meant first and foremost to be just somewhere that people can meet. And now it has features like sharing your screen and there's a chat, but it's not really meant for a learning environment. It's built for a corporate atmosphere where you're meeting with people and occasionally sharing notes and references, but by and large, you're checking in, you're having a quick conversation, then you're leaving and going back to more email-based communication. That's not what education is, and it's certainly not what a Minerva education is, which is a seminar-based experience where you and a small group of other students are having large interactive discussions amongst yourselves, not just one-to-one, and using the resources that you've prepared with the head of class to really dive in. So a platform that actually meets those needs chats that everyone can see and where you can tag people and share links. It needs you to be able to be side by side. So if you were debating someone, both faces could be seen. And to maintain that sense of camaraderie or togetherness in a classroom, you also have to be able to see the other people. And so that's a feature that I particularly miss when I am in my little Zoom bubble at work now, is the ability, and on a Minerva platform, you see everyone in a small icon, kind of like we're sitting now, but you would also have what we call a main stage below that, where some icons are bigger, and those kind of feature the people who are most prominently participating in the conversation. And so it kind of recreates that circle environment of a college seminar. You can imagine if you were all sitting concentric circle talking, and that you lose that on Zoom. You can either see everyone and you can barely see them and they're all laid out weird, or you can see the people who are actually speaking and like see their facial expressions and movements. Minerva also has a lot of other tools for the classroom, breakout groups. You can raise a hand, you can react. The professor can move people around according to how the discussion is moving. There's polling. I could go into it. I'm not a developer, but there's so much that really draws the attention to the difference between a corporate tool like Zoom and a classroom tool like Minerva, which is built not just to be a place where you turn in your assignments or kind of check notes with people, because I do know that a lot of college classes have that, but it's fundamentally for a seminar and built for an entire class to be taken on that. That's not an incidental feature of it. It's built to sustain all of that. And I really miss that. And it feels like my job now is kind of getting by on tools that weren't exactly built to serve the purpose they're serving.
Renee, from your perspective on the other side of this, is, from the teaching end of it, what did you see? I guess starting with that time you got to play in the sandbox, if you will, of the platform, and now as you've started to put the finishing touches on putting it into action for the school year.
I'm so glad you asked me this. I hope that there's enough time. I could literally talk about this for about, I don't know, the rest of the day if you wanted. Yeah, it's funny that you said that because I just left to come over here. I left where our teachers are practicing right now, getting ready for the first round of students. I think as much as Zoom has become important, and again, like Zoe, you don't want to say anything negative, Zoom has become important. What has happened is that a lot of educators and professionals doing their best, it ended up being what is essentially a poor substitute to the original. I feel like I read that in an article that you wrote, actually, Michael, recently. Did you write that recently?
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, but with the Active Learning Forum, it's what people would choose first. It is not a poor substitute to the original. It is an augmented platform for the original. So I'm going to give an example of one of the things that we can do, just kind of expanding off of what Zoe said. So imagine your traditional brick and mortar classrooms. If you were lucky enough in college or certainly in high school, your professors and your teachers probably put you into like small groups. And if you're fortunate enough, they may have even asked you like to divide up some roles and do something together, right? And then the teacher would bring you back out after your small group and there would be some sort of like pull together. But in a Minerva classroom, what you can do is tell all of the students to pick somebody from another group, because in those icons that Zoe was talking about in the top, there are little group numbers. So I know exactly which students were in group 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I can tell all students in group 2 to now find somebody in group 4 that agrees with the position that their group had. Or in those polls that she was talking about, I can just hover over the faces of my classmates and see what their position was on a controversial topic. And if my instructor asks me to, I can find somebody that I agree with, and then we can go into a breakout room to further dive in. Or I can find somebody that I disagree with, and I can use evidence to try to tease out a little bit their claims and see if we can come to some sort of negotiated understanding that is just so much deeper than anything that you're going to get in a static learning environment. It is the most dynamic experience that I have ever come across as an educator. So
No, that's a really good way of saying it. And I appreciate you both saying it's not worth bashing Zoom per se.
Yeah.
Zoom has done an amazing service, frankly, for educators around the world during this time. But your point is also well taken, which is the level of intentionality around the learning experience that is built into the fabric of the platform is just different from anything else out there. And I agree with you, Renee. It's better, I would argue, than any classroom or experience that you could imagine. If we've now flipped to sort of moving through as we wrap up here, the other question I'm curious about is, Renee, on your end, what do you hope the experience looks like for the students at the end of this? When they come through this, what will they have taken, right, from being the first, but also, just not necessarily the first, getting to go through a very unique experience on the other side of it? And then Zoe, I'll give you your question to prep for in a moment, but which is to talk about, as you've gone into the world of work, and National Geographic, I understand, is where you work, how the skills that you built up so explicitly, how that's translated into a work environment. So Renee, maybe you go first and sort of speculate, I guess, what this will look like as you move through the year.
Sure. Well, I guess what I hope that we take away as a school, and certainly as the group of pioneer students that are coming on board, is that sense of community. I hope that they feel a sense of empowerment. I want them to feel like they're safe to take risks in their learning and to explore new options that are available to them. And I'm hoping that we are asking them to look at what can't be contained by a quarantine period, right? So how their empathy and their humor and their curiosity and their sense of community can all still exist in a school and in a learning environment that is resilient to what's going around them, so that they can take that forward into their next phase. We are educating the next group of students that are going to need to be local and global contributors to their economies and their communities. They're going to need to be comfortable doing that in an environment like this. And I see this as a critical addition to what we already offer at the Academy at Laurel Springs for students that are ready to take on that challenge.
Extremely well said. Zoe, on your end, as you reflect as a graduate of the school, what it prepared you to do, How has the Minerva experience directly translated into your day-to-day life now?
Yeah, it's something I think about a lot, and something that I think is really hard to see when you're a student. It feels so abstract. How am I going to use this? Even when you have the most hands-on practical curriculum. I work, as you said, at the National Geographic channel, and so I see a vast amount of content every day, anything from neuroscience to history of the Louisiana Bayou. I've seen it, I've read it, I've reviewed it. And one of the things that in reflecting on my education, I'm particularly grateful for from Minerva is that interdisciplinary nature of our curriculum that we spoke about earlier. The fact that I don't have one idea of history and one idea of science, but instead I've thought about the history of science and how science is informed by the values held in history and vice versa. And that's incredibly helpful as a storyteller. And then, of course, there are the more, I think, finite things that come out of the habits of mind and foundational concepts. And, we spoke about those briefly. The first year of Minerva is really all about drilling into those and shaping how you think. And so things like working backwards is something that you focus on and you talk about, and you very explicitly work on when do you want to plan from the start up, and when is it better to work backwards, and how do you solve different kinds of problems. And those are things that I reflexively just do now, and will find myself really only noticing if I'm working with someone with a very different working style. But I always feel really grateful to have a lexicon to describe how I'm approaching problems and why I'm approaching them that way. And that, I think, that lexicon that applies across disciplines more than anything is the greatest gift Minerva's given me, besides my friends and loved ones.
That's well said. Well said. Final parting thought from both of you, just for students, Zoey, thinking about taking this experience, Renee, for students thinking about taking the Laurel Springs Minerva experience, or for educators thinking of adopting this as part of their high school offerings. Zoey, why don't you go first?
Sure. I think one of the things I recognize in students who succeed in this sort of environment is someone who has come face to face with a large question regarding what education means and should do. So for me, that was, I took a year abroad in high school, and I came back and suddenly I questioned everything because the curriculum over there had been so different. And when you're in high school, generally, you just kind of take everything at face value. That's suddenly very different now, because that used to be a rare characteristic. And now every student is kind of facing that challenge where suddenly you're questioning why education works and when it works and how it works. And if those are questions that excite you, or you've found something that works for you, these sorts of curriculums that are built from finite blocks that kind of build together are really good for someone that wants to build and be an active part of that process, especially now that things are happening online and you have the opportunity, silver lining, to meet all different kinds of people. This is a really valuable way to look at making the most of a tough situation, and to start extending the conversation that's already happening across the US, and just really take advantage of what high school can be, not just what it is.
Perfect. Renee?
Yeah, I echo all the sentiments that you just said, Zoey. That's what I hope that we do. I hope that I know we will. I hope that our teachers and our students come together to show the world what learning can be, and how it can't be contained by things that are going on around us, that it can exist in meaningful ways in the current situation and in years to come. So I hope that they are pioneers, and they feel that sense of pioneer leadership that comes from taking on a journey like this and showing the world how it can be done.
Well, thanks so much to both of you for not just embarking on this experience and being pioneers, but for joining me for today to explain it to so many who will watch and hopefully benefit from it. So Zoey, Renee, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Michael.
Great to be here.